Welcome back, everyone. It's been a long time since we've done one of these. For the folks that are watching right now, as I hold my phone, now you can see yourself. We are going to be, I'm going to be dropping you guys off so I can actually go do this thing. Please join us at twitch.tv/Poor Almanac, YouTube, or Facebook. Just search Poor Almanac. You can find us. So hopefully you guys can hop on over. Now that that's done, I want to introduce my guest. Today we've got a really exciting one. I get tons and tons of messages about what should I do financially? How do I think about, you know, saving for retirement or my student loans or any of these other issues that come up when you start talking about it feels like everything's falling apart around me. So I should probably be thinking about that instead of 30 years from now. So I want to introduce my two guests. They represent Women's Personal Finance. I'll let them introduce themselves. Angela, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Angela, one half of Women's Personal Finance. Also, you might know me as a blogger over at Tread Lightly, Retire Early. And Women's Personal Finance is focused on women and money and all things around life. We pride ourselves on not just being a money group or a money company, but really talking about all pieces of life, because you can't pull money out and somehow pretend that it lives separately from the rest of our lives.
Fair. Regina?
Hi, other half here of Women's Personal Finance. I am a pharmacist by background. I live out on the I don't know. I don't feel right calling it a farm, but a house, and slowly working on all the things. So do that, and I consider married. I'm not really working as a pharmacist much at this point. Doing things that I focus on and running Women's Personal Finance. So this intersection place of yourself in a prepared spot.
Regina, you're really hard to hear right now. Yeah, I think turning off your screen probably better. Regina said something about, maybe it's better. Regina's out on the Oregon coast, kind of doing the homesteady thing with her family. Well, she is a pharmacist by trade and works that a little bit, but is semi-retired at this point and kind of living out on the my audio's glitchy too. Oh no,
it's like clicky. You might want to try unplugging and plugging your mic again.
Okay, I am at least not out in the middle of nowhere, so my internet should be better.
Sounds better.
Okay, well then I will just take off my headphones altogether. My mic didn't work either, so can everybody else hear me better now? Not glitchy? Good? Okay. So versus Regina's like homesteady self on the Oregon coast, I am on a quarter acre in the Seattle area where, I still have a bunch of chickens and a big garden, but limited by space. So, I'm kind of doing the smaller scale thing, and I have a more traditional 9 to 5 job, but I work it part-time doing affordable, sustainable housing. So Regina and I met back in 2018, and we were both bloggers individually then. And one of our first commonalities that really tied us together as friends was talking about what we coined Prepper Fi, which is kind of the preparedness, financial independence, which especially back in 2018, prior to COVID and everything else that's happened the last couple of years, it was a little bit more niche. But as the last couple of years have happened, people have started to listen to us more, and suddenly the more out there part of our lives and conversations is suddenly something that people are listening to more. So we definitely have that in common, but living somewhat different lives, city versus country sort of thing. And then Women's Personal Finance is really focused around women having control of their own money and understanding how to work with it and in the realm of also like now is really weird. So thinking about retirement, decades out is a very, very weird thing when we're living in a time of such, uncertainty.
Well said. So when I think about financial literacy, you bring up a really good point about it's really hard to think about why should I care about saving for 30 years from now. I'm thinking about today. Today was a record high today, and it's been for temperature, and it's been like that for 3 weeks now. Um, and we're in a drought that I've never seen in my life, and this is kind of the new normal. And it's like if this is the new normal, like who are we kidding that the retirement that our parents may have had or may have had at least access to if they never actually were able to do it, that doesn't seem to fit into the future that is waiting for us. So it's really hard to to get our bearings on around this idea of, okay, even if these things are happening around us, whether or not we like it, 30 years is coming, 40 years is coming. Maybe we need that money, maybe we don't. How do you, starting from a very fundamental point, how do you start thinking about that without just totally giving up?
So one of the like sayings that's pretty common in the financial independence like money space is the idea that your money is very safe in the stock market unless we see a total collapse. And as the years have gone by, that joke continues to be less funny. However, when things were really bad with COVID in early 2020, the markets did a massive tank in March, and people were freaking out that it was like the end of everything. And, we're only 2.5 years from there, but had you taken your money out in March 2020, it would have been a bad idea. And if you left it in, it's still worth more than it was then. And time goes by, and we can't know what the next couple of decades are going to hold other than expecting that we're going to see a lot more climate chaos and unsettled lives. But having money for your future is still really important because, if there is some sort of stability in a few decades from now, you don't want to suddenly look up and realize that you're stuck in wherever you're at because you have no money. And it's about having money for now and money for the future. And we are also big proponents of slow-fi, which is basically the idea that you are really focused on having enough money for later, but also making sure that your life now is pretty good. So really trying to design a life that fits you well now without spending every single penny. And if you look up 5 years from now and student loans have still not been repaid, then maybe you've found a way to get out from under them.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, especially the people that are more familiar with the Poor Proles Almanac, one of the challenges of thinking about this idea of like, all right, as an investor, is that it does go against a lot of our values, and an interesting narrative of, am I perpetuating the system that is that's continuing to make things worse by investing in the stock market? If I buy, I don't know anything about the stock market, so I buy index funds. Those index funds are going to invariably own shares in BlackRock and BP and all these other companies that are not good, and are in many ways the accelerants for the conditions that we live in today. And trying to wrap our heads around that and trying to detangle ourselves as individuals who have any real meaningful firepower in that conversation, is really hard. And I think about it personally as those companies, as long as there's a marketplace to exploit, those companies will continue to exist. And at the very least, if you have the resources available, being able to leverage what you can to be prepared for when that time comes, if those companies um, are still around, then you are in pretty good shape in terms of the fact that everything hasn't fallen completely apart. So you should at least get some of that equity out of the I'll call it public cost of what those companies are doing. So that's always been my kind of perspective on the idea of like, individually, how do you blend your politics with the fact that you're investing in something as ubiquitous as an index fund. And I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on that, as someone with similar, I guess, ethics.
Regina, you want to see if your audio's working better now?
We'll try with and without camera. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, a little bit.
Camera. I think that approach, like we're in this system, we're doing what we can to exist within it, and it's what functions, and you can consider the investment gains that you can, like personal payback for, and
You're still pretty glitchy, Regina.
Maybe I'll just give up and sit and nod.
You're still.
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
maybe you can, message something in the chat and I can read it. Regina and I joke that sometimes we're like two halves of the same brain. So I think I will try and pick up that train of thought. Yes, you absolutely need Starlink. This is the problem with living out in the woods, is that her, more recently, again, women's personal finance has become a business for us. And so we looked at, business class internet for her, and she's got like the best that exists where they are, which kind of sucks when you have an online business. But as far as investing in index funds and all of that, we actually had Amanda Holden on last year to talk about like in sustainable investing with us. And the big thing is that even trying to go to like ESG funds, which is environmental social governance funds, which leave out the oil and gas industry and cigarettes, etc. It doesn't leave out Chase and Amazon and Google and whatnot. So even the ESG funds are not super great. But the thing is that unless you have like a ton of money, index funds over the decades are still at this point looking to be your best way to grow some sort of wealth nest egg in the future. And unless we all go, everybody else who doesn't care and is just putting their money into the fund is going to be seeing that return. So in some ways it's best to just, if you have that money to invest it, and then spend your time and the money doing other things that have a bigger impact. Each of us individually is not going to do a huge shift in the market. That said, when you do own stocks, you can be a part of the, annual meeting feedback and all of that. But we at least have mostly stuck to the index fund thing and then focused our life energies on the rest of our lives and kind of letting the money stuff tick away in the background. There are people that are doing some really great work about trying to do a better job with the financial system, but that's not really been us. And really, there's this whole, is capitalism even the best way forward? But we're here now. And so we're living in this system right now, and there's only so much energy we can put into certain places. And so for us, it's been more about, setting ourselves up individually with our homes and our local communities, and then also, following our women's personal finance community online and really helping women and non-binary folks get their money in order, because it's all well and good to talk about, should I invest in index funds or something else, versus someone who is like, I am stuck in an awful abusive relationship and I can't leave because I have no money. So for us, our focus has been more about, how do we make sure that people have more independence and more agency in their own lives when they have the money thing figured out? Because as long as we live under capitalism, going to continue to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way out of that. And I think even to kind of transition this conversation away, the traditional 10% growth year over year That era is probably mostly over, and even today, like a lot of profits are prime or stock valuations primarily driven by supposed future performance through PE indexes and ratios and things like that. So my guess is that the future for us, if capitalism continues to move forward, is going to be less about trying to match what you've made in retirement and more about how have you paid down your debts in order to live with less money, because the days of retiring with 80%, 90% of your income are gone. And the things we can do is manage the fixed costs that we need to live every month. And I think that's where that personal finance piece is really important. So I don't know if you could talk maybe a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, and I think that's a large part of the financial independence, retire early movement, which Regina and I are both in, but in a more, you don't have to eat just bean rice and give up on all of your interests in order to retire as fast as you can. But it's more about having a lower base level of what you need to live day to day. And I like to talk about my emergency fund not just being money. Like, emergency funds are great. Like, when my dog needs surgery, I have money to take her to the vet and get her better. But also, our chickens are a great way to make sure that we have food being produced on our small piece of property. So a lot of the like frugal things can also be really great, like long-term preparedness. Do you know how to bake your own bread? Do you know how to forage in your like local woods? Regina's a big mushroom forager. She actually has another side hustle doing some mushroom sales to local restaurants and whatnot. But the idea is that it's being intentional about your life and about intentionally spending your money versus, sometimes when you see like doomsday preppers and stuff online, they spend gobs of money on their bunkers and their cool fancy tools and stuff. And I would consider PrepperFi to be more about how do you become more self-sufficient and live on a lower baseline. And then when you do have money left over, then you do put it away for a hopeful potential future. And, there's possibility that even if the United States doesn't do terribly well, there may be other places in the world that are more stable. And, if you've got a world index fund, the US is only, a large but not an entire piece of that. So it's about hedging bets of, hopefully we'll all be here in 30 years in some sort of semblance of something, but also making sure that you're set up as well as you can now.
Yeah, balancing those things is a challenge, and I think for a lot of Americans that don't get a lot of financial literacy training through public schools, the idea of trying to tackle that is really difficult because of the fact that there are so many facets to it. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily complicated, but you have to be able to say there's a lot of moving pieces and there's no real right answers. And that's why a lot of financial advisors are able to exist, is because there aren't really answers. It's kind of like this matrix, and you kind of figure out where the heat map is that fits what you're looking for. And there's a number of ways you can fit into that heat map. It's just about basically deciding that, making that decision for yourself, which for a lot of people is really difficult, because when you don't feel like you know enough about the subject matter, you assume you're going to probably make the wrong decision. And that can be, just like I said, really difficult. And that's really, as Regina's mentioning in the private chat, where things like community can be really important.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something that is definitely a big piece of it, is the community. That, like, we're not the rugged individualist Dave Ramsey kind of folks where you've got to pull yourself up by yourself and figure it out. Money and community and life is way more complicated than that. So that's again where we are much more interested about making sure that people are financially solvent so that they have other parts of their life. And you do have to make a minimum amount of money to be able to make choices with it. So, the idea that everybody can retire early, everybody can save a ton of money is not terribly accurate, but there is a lot of simple knowledge, kind of like needing a financial advisor is not something that most people need. Again, you just put money into a basic index fund and then go on with your life. But we build it out this big, scary thing that's something more than it really is.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And this is something that I do get a ton of questions about. We have a very big Instagram following, a decent sized Facebook following, and one of the main things that I get, especially from younger people in their late teens, early 20s, is a, should I go to college? It costs so much money, and like, very valid, and like, you should absolutely be thinking about that before you go to school. Like, should you actually be going to college? And then alternatively, should I pay my student loans back? I'm going to be on a 30-year payment plan. What's the point? Like, is society going to exist in 30 years? Again, like, there's some very real legitimacy to those questions, and it's never that simple. But I think really what gets caught up, and I think this is where like people like Dave Ramsey tend to kind of exploit people, is like, you have to kind of own a decision and make it, and that can be very easily misconstrued into like this conversation about like, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, as opposed to just like acknowledging that this is complicated and there's no right answer, but you have to make a decision. And I think just embracing the fact that you can make a decision and be wrong is really important when it comes to trying to figure out what direction to go, because otherwise you'll be paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision, which is, I think, where a lot of people end up, especially around making your first investment for retirement, or even in the prepping community, like, buying that first, I don't know, 30-pound bag of rice or whatever it might be, that you're like, well, I'm really going to spend $50 on this. Like, there's nothing better I could use this money for that'll, I can actually use, as opposed to like this, um, in a sense, cushion for the future, which is exactly what a retirement plan is. And balancing that's just really difficult for people. So, as you guys try to merge these two worlds together, are there any like common threads that you see between people that are interested but hesitant to invest, as well as like interested but hesitant to prepare for like what's coming?
I think a bit of it too is just that, making the decision. And also it's, when you are putting money into retirement, you're saying that, yes, I have to plan for 30 years from now. And I think that the same thing is for like preparedness. Like, the number of conversations I've had with friends being like, you need to at least have food for a couple of weeks. Um, it's admitting that there's something that you actually need to prepare for in the future. And when you're trying to just live day to day, it's scary to think about maybe needing those things. It's kind of like setting yourself up with life insurance. It's really scary to do your like estate plan, life insurance planning, because then you're admitting that in the future you might actually need it.
Yeah.
And I think thing is the same way, that as long as you don't have a lot of food on hand, and as long as you know that you have to go to the grocery store every week, you can pretend like you won't ever need those things in the future. People seem to maybe be catching on to that a little bit. I mean, after the last couple of years, early in COVID, I'd written a post and shared a list of our just like basic stuff, and people actually listened a little bit and stored some food. But then I also had friends who just like bought a whole bunch of shelf stable stuff that they don't eat, and they're like, what do I do with this stuff? We don't ever eat it, and my canned food's going bad, and what did I do? And I think that happens with the money stuff too. People get super jazzed up with I'm going to save this huge emergency fund and I'm going to pay down all my debt, and then life happens and suddenly they're in a different spot, and it can get really overwhelming and discouraging when life goes as planned. But again, that's why you have the emergency fund, is with collapse and the crumbles or whatever, it might be a complete and total collapse where things go completely awful, or it may continue to crumble like it is. And if we're seeing crumbles, then planning for the future is really important, even if it's scary to think about.
Yeah, and Regina is chiming in the chat that it's possible we're in collapse right now, which is completely valid. It does definitely kind of feel like that, especially with this new wave of a global biodisaster of monkeypox. How can you not say, huh? 2 year or 3 years and two global pandemics and a mutiny in the government and climate change. Yeah, this could be it. Um, yeah, it can be. Despite that, we have to work every day and we have to pay for things every day, even if inflation's continuing to go up. No one will take my hash coins yet, but maybe someday. Um, and yeah, it's surreal. It feels very surreal. The irony is that you'd mentioned life insurance, and I got to say, like, it didn't even occur to me to think about like dying when I was getting my life insurance. And I did that maybe 5 years ago now. I think it was my 30th birthday present to myself as I got life insurance, term life insurance, which I
Yes,
definitely
term.
recommend.
Don't no whole life insurance to anyone who's listening, unless you are extremely wealthy or you have a very specific reason, or if you're terrible at saving and whole life is going to be the one place that you actually save money, maybe. But otherwise, stick to term life insurance, pay your monthly cost, and just consider it as it is life insurance. It is not an investment. It is literally there to protect your loved ones in case you end up offing yourself in some way in the term of the life insurance. We got ours when I was pregnant with our son, and it goes out. It's good until he is 20 years old, and at that point, we figure we won't need life insurance. Our house will be paid off. We'll have enough funds, but in the meantime, enough life insurance that if one of us died, that the other person would not have to work and would be able to just like exist for a while like sorting their lives out.
Yeah,
And
that's I think the goal for term life insurance is like it's so that if you have kids or a spouse that they aren't going to lose everything trying to basically pretend they make two incomes.
yeah. But if you are a single person with no dependents and whatnot, maybe have a loved one as a beneficiary on one of your bank accounts to be paid upon death, enough to bury you. And other than that, like, you probably don't need life insurance. But again, making sure that
Maybe
you
throw a
have,
dope party, like sweet ass funeral,
yeah,
like you for like $10 a month. Like, come on,
or
for
that,
$10 a month, you can get like a pretty sweet term life insurance, so that as long as you die before like 50, they're gonna live it up.
yeah. But also, as long as someone is on your like beneficiary list on your bank accounts and you die, they can access that money immediately if you have it as paid upon death, which is really important because a lot of times money gets tied up when you die, and then even if you had money, if people can't actually access it, it can be a serious hardship in the interim, which is
Yep.
super fun to talk about. But I guess that's kind of the whole point of all of this is it's not super fun to talk about. I know there are certain people who talk about collapse like it's a good thing, and maybe it's what we need to get through to something better in the future. But if you love anyone who needs healthcare on a regular basis, whether it's you or somebody else, collapse is not pretty for a lot of people. But having money also, unless the entire capitalist system completely shuts down across the globe, having money is helpful in times of transition. So it's not just retirement 30 years from now, but worst case scenario, the US is doing extremely poorly, but you have retirement funds that you can cash out and get you to another country, for example. Like, if 30 years out is too hard to think about, there are other reasons between now and 30 years from now that money is a helpful thing.
Absolutely. Now, for folks that are like, all right, yeah, I agree. I've kind of thought about this, but I'm not really sure where to begin. Um, I feel like a lot of the quote unquote internet experts on personal finance will say drink, don't buy coffee at Starbucks. The quit your Netflix subscription, like all these little kind of gimmicky things that I personally don't think generally make a whole lot of a difference.
No.
What is your real suggestion for people that are like, all right, this is something you can do. It's not going to feel like you're giving up the tiny things in your life that make it worth living. Where do people start?
Well, if you literally only have like 20 or 30 bucks a month left over every month, maybe you try and save 5 of it and let the other $25 be for fun stuff. I know that's probably an unpopular opinion with a lot of money folks, but $30 a month is not even going to get you to $500 at the end of the year. So being realistic with what you can actually save. There are some people where money is just super, super tight, and save a little bit if you can. But otherwise, if saving for a year or two is not going to dramatically change your situation, I would suggest to buy the coffee, because life is short and you deserve enjoyment and good things in your life, even before 30 years from now. That said, the three big things generally are housing, transportation, and food. With inflation, food has been really painful, and the idea of suddenly make all your food and grow is great advice, but it's not something you can do overnight. But maybe instead of some other meal once a week, you have ramen with some fancy toppings, and it saves you some money. Like there are ways to save around the edges without taking away all of your joy.
Yeah, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, but that said, there are a lot of people who do have a lot of money that just goes out of the out every month on nonsense. So what I've done in the past for myself is to track every single dollar I spend for a month. It can be kind of overwhelming and painful, but it's a really good way to figure out where your money's actually going, and to determine if do I actually have an income problem or do I have a spending problem. And generally it's one or somewhere in between. And if it really is an income problem and you are squeezing every last dollar, don't beat yourself up when you get that fancy coffee once a week, because that is your like one joy of the week. I am not going to tell you to get rid of that. But if you're also door dashing every week and suddenly you realize you've spent $800 a month on DoorDash, probably that's a good place to cut back. And like Regina said in the chat too, is that not just saving for retirement, but having FU money is a really big thing and can be a big impact in your life well before retirement. So is it worth spending $500 a month on DoorDash, or is it worth in a year having $6,000 and enough of a fuck you fund to be able to like quit your job and go do something else? So it really, people's situations vary a lot, and there isn't any one size fits all advice, which I'd say is the same with prepping. Not everybody has 20 acres to work towards self-sufficiency. You might be in an apartment where you have a sunny window and maybe you can grow some herbs. So it's kind of the same sort of thing with money. There's levels of what you can and can't do.
Yeah, recognize where you are versus where you want to be. And one of the things we talk a lot on the podcast is that the goal isn't to recreate the same type of ecosystem in your backyard as whoever you might be watching on YouTube, but to recognize in the local conditions where you're at. And I think personal finance fits into that same model of recognizing those local conditions of the things you need for the lifestyle that exists from where you live today. Cutting out air conditioning when you live in Texas versus cutting out air conditioning when you live in Maine are two different conversations.
Or
And
when it's 92 degrees in the Seattle area today, again, we turned on our AC.
Yeah, exactly. Today was 102 here, and that's insane.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, I don't know if we're recording yet. We've been basically the last 3 weeks, either at record temperatures or like within a couple degrees with this unrelenting drought, and making the decision about how you're going to use water when there's massive drought plays again into the same idea of like recognizing that the specific conditions of where you're at right now, and being pragmatic about it, because otherwise you end up like you see like people, especially when they try to like lose weight with a strict diet, they do it for a week and then they totally relapse from that program, whatever you want to call it. And the same thing happens, I think, with people's finances. You can spend 2 weeks being really good about not spending any money on anything that gives you joy, but you're gonna snap eventually because you can't live like that indefinitely. And finding ways to be pragmatic about it, or finding ways to even enjoy it, like Regina had mentioned in the comment section, that this idea of like gamifying what you can cut out first, I think really helps too, where it's no longer this thing that you're giving up. It's about um, trying to prove what you can do, almost like any competition, and bringing a different element to the process.
Yeah, for me, and that's another thing, is that we don't all have to go hardcore on the same things. For me, as far as like money and sustainability and stuff, I've not bought any clothing in almost 5.5 years now. I do a lot of buy nothing and hand me downs and that kind of stuff, but I haven't bought clothes in 5 years. But I definitely buy coffee out. So there are things that, and at this point, really, the not buying clothes thing has become a lifestyle thing, but also like it's that gamifying. Can I continue to keep doing this indefinitely? But I'm not trying to be perfect on other stuff. So picking the stuff that's fun for you and what's interesting, and the community piece too, of there's so much money that you might spend on other stuff, but if you find people locally that you enjoy spending time with, go for a hike nearby and learn your native plants instead of going to the bar and spending a bunch of money. So a lot of the thing there's a lot of overlap between like things that get you better about sustainability and like self-sufficiency that are also really good money things. I made dandelion jelly for the first time 2 weekends ago with dandelions in my front yard, and that cost me a little bit of sugar, and otherwise I used the mason jars that were in my closet. I'll bring it to like a potluck dinner one of these nights, and it's one thing that I didn't buy. Is it going to save me a lot of money? No, but is it also just like another skill of like, well, I can now figure out a way to eat dandelions that are in my yard? Yes.
So. Yeah. And I think even like with the community aspect, one of the things I think we don't really, or we're not really aware of until later on, is how much we spend on one-time use items, especially in the homesteady type communities. The idea that everyone needs a rototiller if you're tilling, or that everyone needs the centrifuge for like making to harvest the honey from beehives, or a depucker for your chickens if you're raising meat birds. All these things that we use maybe 6, 8, 10 hours a year at the most. For some reason, all of us need to have one, as opposed to collectively owning one or sharing one, or I have this, you have that. We swap when we need it. All these, wood splitters. You could just keep going on and on. All these things that we all own, have sheds full of this stuff, thousands of dollars, and we don't need it 99% of the year.
And you get to know the people that you live around too, which is also like a really big resiliency piece, is actually knowing your neighbors and finding things that you have in common with them. And there are tool libraries in our area, but honestly, like as cool as those are, I am way happier knowing which neighbor I can grab said thing from than going to like a tool library and checking out stuff. My husband tends to be a tool connoisseur. He also works in construction, so he has a lot of his own stuff, but he's also been good about sharing that with people. So maybe you're the person that has the tools, but maybe they're the one that has the sewing machine and the pressure canner. Like it's the money thing, and it's also the space. We don't live in a big house, and so you also have to find a place to store all this stuff. And do you want to have space to store the tools, or is it better to have an extra couple of like 50-pound buckets of rice?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you brought up this idea of like it's not just the tools, but also the knowledge that comes with those tools. It's not like you can go get a wood chipper. Like just say you can rent the wood chipper. How do you know if the blades are sharp? Like you're like, I don't know. Is it supposed to go this fast? Is it supposed to go faster? Is it supposed to like? Is it going too fast? Like if you don't use the stuff every day or once a year, you don't know that. And having those relationships with people, where I'm kind of the chainsaw guy in my like area because I am the one that's cutting down trees, and all the other my neighbors are like, "You're insane! I can't believe you're cutting down that tree." Um, and when trees come down, I'm the guy that shows up with the chainsaw. And my neighbor has one, but he doesn't know how to like. I always cringe a little bit when I see him using it because I'm afraid he's going to cut off his leg. And I can help him with that. I can help him, just know how to sharpen his chainsaw, how to make sure it's running correctly. Is that supposed to be smoking like that? All those things that you wouldn't know otherwise unless you're somebody that uses it more frequently. And that's the piece that gets lost in the just that tool library where you can just go and check something out.
Yeah, we are both married to those guys.
Chainsaw guy.
Oh, absolutely. Regina has a bunch of acres of trees, and her husband does quite a bit of the chainsawing to fell stuff there. And then my husband, a month or two ago, we went to a friend's house, and they were definitely taking trees down. And so it's also that community piece of sharing those skills. But I don't think either of us are the chainsaw people, but we're married to
Not
them.
yet.
Yes.
Not yet.
But we're also the money people in our households, so that we have the money to buy the chainsaws. So that's a good thing too. And then focusing a little bit more on the money piece. This is again just me thinking about Regina's husband is a stay-at-home dad, and so they have been a single income household for a long time. And for anyone who's listening who only one partner works, if you have a partner, there is this thing called a spousal IRA that we like to talk about a lot. So if you're not familiar with it, it is a way to contribute to retirement accounts in the non-working partner's name, which is a really big deal because normally if one person's working, that spouse has all of the money, retirement money, in their name, and the non-working spouse doesn't. So you can open a spousal IRA and contribute up to $6,000 a year in that person's name, which isn't so much homesteady, except for the fact that if you ever need to leave a relationship, having your own money is also really important. And again, that doesn't have to be 20 years from now. That could be 20 months from now that your relationship goes sideways and you want to have your own money that's only in your name.
Yeah, and I think that offers some equity in the fact that someone's staying home and taking care of the kids, and while it may not provide any monetary gains, there's still an equity issue in that process. So IRAs are great. Spousals are great. Roths can be really good depending on your income bracket and kind of where you expect to be when you retire. Is there any particular tools that you think are either underutilized or something that you think are a little bit more accessible for a lot of folks that may be just getting into this for the first time?
I can't actually see the chat anymore, so I don't want to not talk about what Regina's saying. So if you
She
see it,
mentioned HSAs, so if you want to talk about
HSAs.
HSAs, as a
Sure.
tax guy, I hate HSAs, but I understand why people like them.
Why do you hate them as a tax guy?
Because the what the hell's the form called? 5457, I think is what it's called, is a pain in the ass. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah. Well, HSAs are health savings accounts. Depending on how you use them, they are what people call triple tax advantaged. So the money that you put into them is not taxed. It grows tax free, and when you take it out, it is also not taxed. These only generally work if you don't need to spend the money up front. If you need the money, you want to take it out and use it. But if you don't need it, you can save your receipts and then take it many years down the line to get that money out. I don't have one, but I also am less in love with them because people tend to then put off going to the doctor because they don't want to touch the money in their HSA. So as long as you don't need it and you're still going to go to the doctor, HSAs are a great tool, but they can also convince you that maybe you don't need to go to the hospital just yet because you don't want to use that money. Though the last couple, I don't think any of us have been wanting to step anywhere near a hospital either. So maybe
Yeah,
now's
and
a good time.
there's also an additional benefit around if you die and how that money is managed to be passed on to whoever is your the people who you're passing on your money to, which we can talk about. Well, actually, we won't talk about it because I do not want to get in trouble for saying something incorrect. But yes, there's a lot of benefits, especially if you have a decent amount of money, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this, you probably don't.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
it probably doesn't affect you too much.
Yeah. Well, and neither of us are financial experts. We're just money nerds, and this is how we do our own stuff. So say this is for educational purposes only. And if you have any really complicated money stuff, do go to a tax professional, or not tax, financial advisor. That said, make sure you go to a fiduciary fee only, because if you go to someone who is not, they will be tempted to upsell you on things that make them big commissions. Hence the earlier part of the conversation about whole life insurance, because they tend to get big commissions from selling whole life. So they'll make it sound really good, whole life, annuities, that sort of thing. Financial advisors get a kickback from that sort of thing. So if you do want to go to a professional to talk about your money stuff, make sure they're just charging you by the hour or by the conversation, and that they are a fiduciary, which means that they are required to suggest things that are in your best interest, not their best interest.
For sure. Now,
and get the 401k match, says Regina.
Yes, if your company offers it, yes, that's great.
Yes.
And
I would also
sometimes they
say,
offer it and then take it away.
Yeah.
So just be aware.
I'd also say
that
right
happens.
now, with inflation the way it is, I-bonds are a pretty good deal right now, as far as like not losing money, especially if you're maybe less comfortable in the stock market. I-bonds are something that are the federal government's way of making sure that your money at least keeps up with inflation. So right now, if you buy I-bonds, they are at like a 9.62% interest rate, which, is really just keeping up with inflation, but it makes sure that your money isn't going backwards. It's because any savings account right now that you save your money, it's losing value over time. But you also have to commit to I-bonds for at least a year before you can take them out. So it's not for money that you need urgently, but if you're saving up for a house that's 2 to 5 years away, I-bonds can be a good way to at least make sure that your money holds its value over time.
Yeah. Anything we didn't cover. I mean, the fact, it's funny, we're like, well, you have to prepare for the future because of all these things, because like the rich are going to try to keep what exists today going as long as they physically can, through whatever tools they have available, and their wealth comes from the stock market. So by definition, like, investing in the stock market is basically an investment that, like, the worst case scenario happens, which is that the rich will just continue to get richer and maybe you get a little bit more out of it. And the worst case scenario is that things fall apart, which is also pretty bad too. So like, there's just two bad scenarios that are happening, and you get to invest in both in different ways, one with beans and one with bills.
Yeah.
And it's just super fun.
Well, and that's the thing though too, is that like, if we do go down the dystopian future path of corporations having more and more money and the ultra rich having more and more money, then having money in the stock market will at least give you some kind of buffer. And if we end up in a future where money is useless, then you may as well have put your money in the stock market, because a savings account isn't going to help you either, nor is, way too much money on,
iTunes.
bunches out.
Yeah. Like
But,
your iTunes library will be suddenly worthless, so why does it matter?
Exactly. So it's a hedge against the future, but we are definitely both in the hedge against the financial future, but also, the non-financial aspect. And yeah, Regina says you can live simply and share those funds with your family, friends, and community to work towards your goals. So there's definitely a balance there, but also the more money you don't spend on your iTunes library and your all the other subscriptions or whatever else, you can spend some of that money to have a couple weeks of beans and rice, and maybe you learn how to grow a little plot of land and that sort of thing. So it's a balance between now and future, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. It's going to look different. Sometimes when we talk about collapse and the future and whatnot, people are like, oh well, I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Things looked really, really bad. Things always get better again. And I counter that with that climate change was not a factor in the way that it is now. So even, everything else I could see maybe equaling out, but the fact that climate change is here and is coming for us in a big way, things aren't going to go back to 2019 normal ever again.
No. And I think that's the hardest pill to swallow, is that, especially for those of us that have kids, to look at them and to say, sorry, like the future that I had planned for you doesn't exist anymore. And that is something that has been taken away, and I can't do anything about that. And that's difficult, but we can think about how we can leverage the resources we have to make the best future for them available. So there's a bunch of different things you can do. Regina had commented on trying to step away from work by front loading and working towards her financial independence. And there's things you can do because you don't have to work anymore that are more ethical. One of the things that I've been thinking about is, if you have money, if you have equity and you don't want to put it in the stock market, buying a piece of land and, something that you can share with other people, to let them, people that don't have access to land, to work on it if you can't, and allowing them to grow food, or, grow native plants, or whatever it might be that, is able to give back to the community in some capacity, is another way that you can leverage the resources you might have available, while also, unlike the stock market, there's finite land growth possible, and buying a piece of land is taking one piece of land out of Bill Gates's potential ownership, and that's kind of cool. And in that process, there are some financial tools, depending on states, about treating that piece of land like an asset and capitalizing things like tax costs, so that you basically can write off some of your benefit or taxes that otherwise, with the new tax code changes, you wouldn't be able to do. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit into the weeds on that, but there are some really cool things you can do if you want to, and you do have a little bit of equity. It does take a little bit of researching and kind of figure out where you're most comfortable, but there's some cool stuff you can do.
Yeah, and Regina says too is support people who are sharing information and doing stuff like Pork Rolls. Like, you guys are great, and I think that just the sharing of knowledge publicly is really, really important. And kind of like us, you guys are community funded. You don't have big sponsors and whatnot, and we do the same thing at Women's Personal Finance, where when you don't take money from big corporations, you're allowed to say and do whatever you want, which feels increasingly important, that you can share how you truly feel without worrying about like getting money yanked out from under you. So,
But you haven't heard our Raytheon commercial yet, I guess.
oh no.
I'm kidding. But yeah, so thank you for the plug. If you are enjoying this content, well, first off, go follow these fine folks at on Twitter at Women PF. That's WOMXNPF, and I'm reading that out because of the fact that this video gets ripped into audio and gets posted on the Poor Pro Skillshare podcast, which is very literally me just taking the audio and sticking it in there with complete zero edits. So I do want to make sure if people have enjoyed this that they can go tune in or follow you guys over on Twitter and check out what you guys got
And
going
if
on.
you are a woman or non-binary and you're on Facebook, I know Facebook is the evil empire, but join us at Women's Personal Finance. It'll be the first thing that pops up there. We are working on getting more away from Facebook, but it has been our initial platform and where we have a large community. So it's definitely a like give and take about how long do we stay with Facebook. Well, that's where a lot of people find WPF. It's definitely
Yeah,
tricky.
it's. I mean, it's tough because the Facebook groups are great. Like as much as I hate Facebook, like there's a lot of very niche like groups on like stuff that me and 100 people are interested in, and they're all like boomers, so they're all on Facebook. So like if I want to like tune into like some dude that's been coppicing like ash tree for 50 years, I'm only going to find that guy on Facebook in the UK. Like I'm never going to find him on Discord or Instagram or whatever or TikTok. So for those types of things, it's really hard to say I'm not going to use it anymore. So like I don't judge for the Facebook thing. I get it.
But yeah,
go ahead.
so plugging Poor Proles, support these guys. They're doing great work. It's important, and it's important to we talk about not spending money on subscriptions and that sort of thing, and we really mean do you really need Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and I don't know
I feel
all
like
the
you're
other
coming
ones.
after me right now.
Oh, do you have all of them?
Yes, but I have kids, so that's my excuse.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have some of those because we also have a kid. But the point is that we spend money so freely on these big giant corporations, and yet it's somehow difficult to then sign up for someone's Patreon or send them a few dollars for something that you really appreciate. We've gotten so used to individuals and small groups are expected to share all of their information for free forever, but then we don't give two extra thoughts to the fact that we are giving more money to Jeff Bezos, and it's such a strange dichotomy. Again, we still live in capitalism, but if we're going to try and live a little better within capitalism, maybe we should consider putting our dollars to the things that matter, and giving Andy some money so that he can buy another native some sort of tree is going to go a lot further than spending another $20 on Amazon when Jeff Bezos just made millions of dollars in the time that we've had this conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to think about it. That'll hurt. So anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover at this point?
I mean, I guess the biggest thing is just both with preparing for any sort of future current collapse and money stuff is that trying to find a balance between all of it. It's really easy to get super doomer about the future too. My optimism has definitely crumbled as the years go by, but I do try and also live and enjoy as much as I can now. Like you can be doing fun things that help you be set up better for the future, but also remember that these years go by fast, and they seem to go by faster with COVID time. Making sure that you're just intentional about the way you live, be it with your money or any kind of preparedness stuff. Just you only have so much money, and you only have so much like life on this planet, and finding some kind of balance, I think, is the most important thing.
Don't waste it.
Yeah. Because who knows, maybe we'll get hit by a meteor and none of this matters anyway.
And my wife won't even get that life insurance policy. Like all of that for a waste.
I know. Well, if we're all dead, I guess we're okay.
Yeah.
Okay then.
So thank you both so much for coming on. I know Regina didn't get to talk too much, but we tried to include her as much as we could.
Yeah.
Um,
Regina and
and
I will just have to go and do like a YouTube live or something, the two of us, and try and make her internet work better. And we'll
there you go.
we'll let you
Um,
know when we manage that.
yeah. So thank you guys both for coming on. This has been fantastic. I know there's a bunch of people that have been tuning in, so they're quiet for some reason. Hopefully, they can, if they'd like to say a few words, please chime in the chat. But this was really interesting. It's always really fun to get different perspectives from my own, and to, I guess, like I kind of tend to write off finance in a lot of ways because I'm so like buried in it with my own work. But I do think it's really important to have these conversations and to be pragmatic about how we tackle some of these issues um, in terms of, you know, finding ways to balance our ethics with the reality of the world we live in. And sometimes it's very easy, especially when you're behind a keyboard, to just kind of fall into like very black and white when that's just not the world we live in. Like, how is investing in the stock market any worse than getting an Amazon Prime subscription? At least with stock ownership, you get some of that money back. That's not no longer going to a handful of rich people. So I appreciate you guys coming on, and it was a really great conversation. For folks that are listening, watching, want to hear more, uh, we um, we just released an episode yesterday night with the Buffalo Field campaign, talking about wild buffalo and the future of Yellowstone Park. So, wildly different conversation than what we've had tonight. But please go check that out. Next week, we will be talking with Helen Ann Curry about the history of maize and landrace varieties that were thought to be lost, and the precarious state of corn in the modern world. Are we all going to starve to death because corn has been too inbred? So, really getting in on that doomer stuff. So we'll be chatting with her, and it's a really great, interesting conversation. A lot of cool stuff going on in the genomics world, which is way outside my scope of knowledge. If you've enjoyed this conversation, enjoyed the podcast, please, like they suggested, um, hop on Patreon. $2 a month, 7 cents a day. Supports the podcast, the Twitch stream, the YouTube channel, the memes. So if any of those things matter to you, if you'll spend a dime a day for my memes, then please spare a dime on our Patreon. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Unless you guys have anything else
Support
you'd like to add.
them on their Patreon. It's less than one Starbucks a month.
There you go.
If we're gonna
Actually, I think we're to the point where it's less than one Dunkin' Donuts a month.
okay, well, less than one Dunkin' Donuts a month. We spend so much money on like useless stuff. Maybe just try and spend a little bit of money on the content creators that you care about who are doing the good stuff.
I'm just gonna have you show up on our Instagram yelling at people. That's gonna be my new like Patreon model. Is just have you just yell at people.
Yeah, we talk so much about like, especially in women's personal finance, about knowing our own worth and like making sure we, get what we deserve, and then at the same time we turn around and it's such a weird mindset that we seem to have that Amazon is worth our money, but the poor pearls aren't, and like that is such a broken thought process, and yet we all seem to like fall into it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's very easy to say like, why should I contribute when I can get it for free? And I think that comes from a long line of like being so used to if I can steal it, like Pirate Bay torrenting, whatever, then I'm gonna do it. And like we can very quickly detach the labor from the product, that we forget that also exists with like those more let's call them intimate uh services or products or whatever, podcasts, Twitch channels, Twitter people, whatever it might be, and reconnecting those things in our community um, comes with a piece of accountability that is very much financial, that we have to address in some capacity.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's easier for me to tell people to yell at people to support poor pearls than it is for me to say, but then you also support women's personal finance. We've just capitalism convinces us that we need to be spending money on the big companies, but then how dare we ask for some of that ourselves? It's
Yeah, like the second you know somebody personally, it seems weird to do the same.
Yep.
To transactionalize our relationship, which is in a way probably a good thing, in the sense that like I don't want my friends to be a transaction, but also like that transaction is necessary in
we
the
live
world we
in
live in.
capitalism right now.
If you want your friend to not starve to death, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Regina commented that I sound like a UNICEF commercial, so I will be putting in my application this week.
that'll pay better than Poor Pearls, I bet.
Probably, yes, absolutely. Above the poverty line.
Yeah,
Very important.
it's a high goal for a content creator
Yeah,
to be
right.
above the poverty line. So, right.
So thank you guys so much. This was great. Again, Twitter at WomenPF. And, I'll
Or
be reposting this wherever I can.
womenspersonalfinance.org is also, you can find all their stuff there. So,
Or womenspersonalfinance.org. So good luck, and I'm sure we'll be chatting in the future.
all right. Have a good night.
Bye.